Welcome again. Just to remind you what we're doing. This is the very first annual First Christian Amway competition we're doing. You know what Amway? Just teasing. My dad used to sell Amway a long time ago. We're doing Revelation. Do you remember the Amway? That was just a joke. She's like, okay, he's teasing. Last week, there's some people here who can't be here tonight, but I talked to some, and one in particular said, David, I'm reading through the book, and I don't know what to do with all these other references he's making. So he'll talk about something, and then in quotation marks or in parentheses, he'll list other things. What do we do with that? What are all these other books? These other books are the other books I told you about chiefly, and that is the other apocalyptic works or some prophetic work, Isaiah, Zechariah, whatever. Sometimes there are other Greco-Roman authors. The reason why Talbert does that, he'll talk about an idea such as demons. And we don't have 3 or 4 or 5 paragraphs on demons in the ancient world or something. I have 2 or 3 paragraphs, real condensed. He likes to be real condensed. And put it, in the ancient world, Greeks believe this. And in parentheses, he'll put, 5 or 6 different references to what they believe right there. You don't have to know what all those sources are. If it says, italicize XYZ3 period, you're like, what in the world is that? Just, you can do a Google search that if you want to see exact references, but he's referencing ancient works. Why do that? Who gives a rip what ancient people thought about these concepts? Because it's predicated on the assumption, as I have too, that is, ancient people did not write in a vacuum. They had literature and ways of thinking about the world, and many things in the Bible are, they usually say, in the milieu, in the air of how to think about the world. It doesn't necessarily mean they borrowed from it. It might be that borrowing is difficult to actually prove. But at minimum, it means other people thought this way about the world. That helps us understand the Bible many times because we realize, this was a common belief, or this is how, if it seems common to this other author, and this other author gives us a little more details, it kind of, that elucidates it. Now, it's not a surefire thing, but when you have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other references talking about demons and a dog, it's pretty well known that means most people thought demons lived in dogs. That's not really true, but my point is if it lists over and over and over, so that's a common thing. And he'll do that with Greeks and Romans, and then Jews. And he'll say Jews start from the Old Testament and go all through the Jewish literature and realize this is a common theme. That's really important to help us understand historical context. And then we can compare it when it's similar. We can contrast it. And typically that's what he does a good job. He'll say, unlike all ancient people, or very similar to what they believed, here's how they talked about it, here's how they thought about it. So that's what's in parentheses, and that's why he's citing all of it. And if over time, like even now, you say, David, now what is this again? What reference is that? I don't know all of them, but I know a good bit of them. Like First Enoch and so forth, he'll mention that's a Jewish apocalyptic work that we study all, So that's why he's referencing it. Any question about that? I'll move on. Yeah, Dennis.
Just one.
Good. So Eusebius, what page?
This is on page 1.
So those have the books. We can look at the exact same thing. That's a great question because those look exactly together.
And then there's several of them throughout when I was going through and looking at them.
Right.
So it's just a use of go ahead.
That's right. So this is common in scholar. That's good. This is real good. This is perfect kind of questions. So the first paragraph, he's saying that the apocalypse of John, or Revelation, it took a long time to accept into what's called the canon. And the Eastern Orthodox, it took a long time. And the Western Church, it came pretty quickly. And he's saying, by that date it was regarded as authoritative in Syria by 200. Theophilus of Antioch, so Eusebius church history. Eusebius is a shorthand of a long name for a man. We call him Eusebius for short. And he's most well known for his book called The Church History. It's a multi-volume work. And when he's saying Theophilus of Antioch thought it was authoritative, we don't have the writings of Theophilus of Antioch on this issue. Eusebius says Theophilus thought it.
Right.
Eusebius,
that's why it says so?
Correct.
Okay.
It's like saying, according to Eusebius, that's what Theophilus thought.
Because there was no writing, even though I'm close to your time, I'm after, and that was either it was destroyed or it wasn't written down.
Correct. Either it was destroyed or not. That's exactly right.
Interpretation.
Or it means, in many scholars believe Eusebius did have some written works of these people he quotes. We don't have those copies. We only have Eusebius. And that's also a little inside scoop. In scholarship, it's very much debated all the time if Eusebius was right or wrong. And so oftentimes they'll say, according to, or thus, or so, kind of like saying, wink, wink. He says it, that's the best we got.
Right.
And that's exactly why he says it. But when it quotes him directly, it means like, so Eusebius, in Italy, Justin Martyr, 1 Apology 28, Dialogue 81. We have his literature. Justin Martyr was an early Christian apologist. He defended the faith. And we have copies of his manuscript. So that's quoting from him. So it means that I looked up what's called the first apology, first defense, paragraph 28, I would find a reference to the apocalypse. Now, how do I know it's by 200? Because Justin Martyr was alive by then. He was in the late first, second century. So he's saying, if these authors are mentioning it, at least by authoritative, at least by then it's already authoritative in their regions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good, good. This is perfect. Any other question on any of that at all? All right, don't be afraid to ask. And as we go along, please, as I said last time, those of you new, really please don't be afraid to ask questions. It's really good to do that. If there's only one commentary you get, you can do whatever you want. I recommend Talbert's book. If there's a book you want to read overall about end times, I like Hill's book, Craig Hill. Another good commentary has been with the third. They're just good guys. Okay. Tonight what I want to do is, and our time, limited time each time, is to talk about a few more subject matters about apocalyptic literature. That's genre. Well, let me back up. Some of you are new. And it's on your handout. So it's features of apocalyptic literature. If you see on that, we covered that Jews and Christians wrote in a kind of writing that mostly is just dead today. We don't write that way anymore, and so it's real confusing to read it. But Jews and Christians sure got it, and they kept writing this way. They deliberately use this heavy symbolism, metaphor, and so forth. They typically wrote in a false name of a distant time, and so forth. Our Apocalypse of John is weird because it was supposed to be right then pressing most of it, and it was written by a guy named John of Patmos, not in a false name. So we know the guy, and he had authority in the churches to whom he writes. We'll talk about that some probably next week. So it's a long history of a kind of literature that we don't read much today. And in your handout, I give you, I think, every reference of Judaism in Jews and Christians. Greeks, Romans had kind of literature kind of like it, but not really. You have to really believe in a Jewish understanding of time, and God brings sovereign over it to really have the apocalypse. So zombie apocalypse is nonsense. That's a modern, so when scholars use it, that's it. Apocalypse just means revelation. And I want to talk tonight about some other major themes that will impact and affect the rest of the book. And then tonight we're going to start Revelation. Then next week I want to start the churches of Asia Minor. But we'll try to get as far as we can tonight. But I'm still going to talk about some big themes because they're big ideas. Okay. Something that we need to understand right off the beginning is in the ancient world, Jews Zoroastrians probably believe this as well. Zoroastrian religion is from Persia, but Jews are most well known for it. But Jews, Zoroastrians, and now Christians and Muslims, all four share something in common that is unlike all the other what we call Far Eastern religions. And that is they have a view of time that's linear. Time is linear. It started and it'll go on, but it's going to come to an end. There's going to be an ending point. I'm not going to draw it just yet. What the Jews believed, everybody see this, I think, pretty well? Okay. So what the Jews believed, of course, is that God started it all. Time itself was a creature. When the universe came into being, time was started. It's a long issue story, but anyway, time began. Okay, God began. Okay, then we'll go flash forward a long time, and then here it comes. The Jews would say it goes on and on and on, and there's going to come a time when there's a cataclysmic kaboom. And this is in your handout. We talked about this last, and that's the Yom Adonai, or the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord. Now this is all, it literally means day of my Lord. But anyway, day of the Lord is how we usually translate it. And this is in your pocket literature. If you look on page 4, when we talked about prophetic eschatology, if you're new, there's a lot of new vocabulary, I'm sorry. Eschatology is a study of end times or last things. The prophets talked about the end time like this. So time goes on, tick-tock, end time. So we might call year 1000 BC, 999 BC, 99, it's chronological. God's going to intervene on earth in the Yom Adonai, the day of the Lord, and that's Judgment Day. So I'll put a big J there. So there's Judgment Day, JD. J.D. Sumner, a good bass singer. Anyway, so the day of the Lord, or Y.A. Yom Adonai, and then he's going to establish on earth a Jerusalem kingdom. And there's a general view that over here is just the present age. It's not that bad. If people want to stop sinning, they'll stop. And so he sent the prophets, knock it off, stop doing that, repent, or you're going to get judgment day, or you'll get a minor judgment day. That is, I'll send the Assyrians to get you, the Babylonians to get you. That was all God's judgment. But eventually there's going to be a final judgment where all nations will be judged. And then after that, we'll keep going. Later on in Judaism, they developed this other idea of a messianic kingdom. So this idea of Messiah, a kingly figure of David, because of 2 Samuel 7, it's not, since he's not here yet, eventually it's going to happen. And when that happens, this kingdom on earth will be a messianic kingdom. MK, messianic kingdom. On earth, and the Jews will reign here. And there are hints here and there, like in Isaiah 65 and some other places, that they believe that it wasn't just on earth, but a time to come. There are hints of that. But in general, you have present age, judgment day, messianic kingdom, all's happy and bliss forever. Does that make sense in general? And that's on your chart, page 4. I have a different little thing. That's basically what it is. Here, what I'm trying to say is, in essence, Jews did believe that time as you know, as we know it, basically was going to come to an end. They weren't very metaphysical in the description. Does that mean when Judgment Day happens, if it's the year 1996, is 1997 the next year? They don't really explain all that stuff. It's just Judgment Day. I think if you pushed them hard, the prophets, they probably say, well, yeah, it is. It's just now there's a new kingdom in order, and there'll be peace in Isaiah 11 and all that stuff.
So the prophet timeline.
The prophet
leaves
timeline.
out end time.
Correct. So, good. Okay, so you said the prophet time in
What you're saying, right? I mean, we'll continue.
Very good. Okay, so thank you for the clarification. So in the prophetic eschatology, this is the end times. The end times is what happens right before Judgment Day. But they don't have much speculation about what happens before. I'm going to go there. I'm going somewhere else in a second. But that is their end times. Their end times that. But it's not the way we might use it today in the sense of which we're used to, which is the next, which is apocalyptic end times. So their end times, there's not much, well, there's Judgment Day, Yom Adonai, it's going to happen. He's going to judge the evil Gentile nations. He'll vindicate the Jews. They'll go home to Jerusalem. They're going to build a new temple. And someone from the line of David will reign forever. And that's kind of period. They don't have a lot of, and then what? That's just the way it's going to be. And that was enough for them to be happy. Well, let me introduce some vocabulary I want to keep using a lot in our study. And that is, and you don't have, this isn't like technical, but it's common in this study. We call these major time periods epochs, eras, or ages. I'll just use the word ages. Or it's an age, all right? So these are the major ages, epochs, eras, right? Just the major ages of the time. Does that make sense? So in apocalyptic studies, we often say this middle judgment day is called the shift of the ages. When you go from the way it was to the way it's going to be. It's kind of like having children. You can't go back. You're no longer cool. You no longer have energy. You're no longer happy and peaceful. No, I'm just kidding. But so there's a watershed moment when you do that. There's a watershed moment when you get married, ideally. I mean, there's a watershed moment where it's, BC before BK, before kids and things like that. It's ancient. Well, the Jews thought that too. And the shift of the ages involved Judgment Day on earth and so forth. Okay. But then there's these people called apocalyptic authors. And in the Old Testament, there are hints to it. There are hints. But really around the time, about 100 or 200 years before Jesus is born, the Jews start developing some much more, developed or different understanding of the way it's going to be at the end of time. And we call that apocalyptic eschatology. So we have the beginning of time, and it's going along, but it's not present age. It's a present what? I have it on your chart there, page 14. It's a present evil age. It's evil. Or maybe it's the top of page 15. I said it's called a negative anthropology, the top of page 15. Five, not page 15. Like, I don't have that many pages. Top of page 5, humans have a negative anthropology, like they are sunk. It's not a present age, it's an evil age.
There's no going back.
There's no going back. It's so corrupt and nasty, and so it's bad. And time's moving forward, and apocalyptic authors started saying this. There's going to be Yom Adonai. They're Jews. There's going to be a day of the Lord. There's going to be Judgment Day. It's going to happen. Boom. So that's still there. But they started believing that, and why it shows this picture, of course, on purpose, is the earth itself is going to get a bit unraveled. It's coming undone. Jews thought of creation as stuff given order, like Play-Doh that's formless and it gets formed. When it gets formed, it has a function, it gets named, now it exists. And so if you want to talk about judgment or chaos, you talk about an unraveling, much like a rug or a shirt or something that's kind of coming undone. Apocalyptic authors believe that about the entire cosmos. Because of that, stick with me here, things are going to get not better, they're not going to get the same, they're going to get what? Worse and worse and worse and worse, then boom. And because it's a present evil age, it's so stinking bad, they don't need a bath. They need a brand new body. And so they have a new heavens and new earth. And this is the world to come. And I'll call that world WTC, world to come. If you say heaven, which you can, the problem we use the word heaven, in my experience working with Christian folk, is that heaven typically means something like that movie with Demi Moore and Patrick Swayze and Ghost, and they're just platonic, roaming ghosts. They're just all glowing white, and that's all they do forever. That's not Christian. That's Plato. Most Christians have that view. They're just mistaken. The biblical view is not that. The biblical view is that in the world to come, we get a brand new body. Paul says this explicitly in 1 Corinthians 15. The perishable cannot put on the imperishable. It can't. It will get a brand new body. That means you'll be able to hug and touch and grasp things again. But there's this middle time in between. Now, okay, maybe later on if you want to. So, David, what about people who die now? That's not, okay, I'll go there some other time. Apocalyptic literature doesn't talk much about that. It does some, though, and does in Revelation. So in a nutshell, I'm trying to get at here is, the way apocalyptic authors talk about the shift of the ages is as cataclysmic, as cosmic, it gets worse, Judgment Day. And since the Christians, the Jews thought this way, period. The Christians thought this way, the apocalyptic authors, their Judgment Day just involved Jesus coming back. And they had that word, remember I told you, that's the parousia. The parousia. It means arrival or coming or presence. And that's what they called it. That day of the Lord and parousia equal the same thing. So they take their good old Bible, they know their Bible, they know their Amos, they know their day of the Lord, and then they say that's the coming, the arrival of whom? Well, the resurrected Jesus to come back as king and ruler. That's just good biblical theology. And this is all through the New Testament. Most scholars concur that the New Testament, at large, the 27 books that are in our Protestant canon, are largely, chiefly apocalyptic in nature. The Apostle Paul was apocalyptic. People say that Jesus was an apocalyptic prophet. So the general outlook of a New Testament author is this view. And they believe, and here's where, if you're with me so far, what they believed is, you see this all in the New Testament. If we had the time, we look up all the verses. But you can go read Mark 13. All the verses are there in your packet. I asked you for homework to go read all those other passages. I don't know if you did or not. Mark 13, 1 Thessalonians 4, and on. They believe, can you look up here for a second, that it gets worse and worse and worse? They had different words for the worst and worse and worse. They had words like this, the tribulation. They would call it, metaphorically, the birth pangs. Of course, stay with me here for adults. What is a birth pang?
I have no idea.
I know, Dennis. So what is it? So labor pain, right? So when the contractions start, what's coming after it, of course? Ideally, eventually it hurts and hurts and hurts, and then baby's born. It's a building process, and all of a sudden baby comes out. And that's exactly why that metaphor is said. We're going to, the entire age is just, and then boom, out pops world to come. Wah, wah, world to come. That's what I call it, and then you have the birth pangs. So it hurts, but it's exciting, right? It's joyful, but it hurts. So, I mean, imagine it hurts a lot. But also at the same time, even I've seen my own wife and stuff, it hurts, but it means the end is near. The end, and that's kind of happy because then we get to hold our baby. Paul will use this exact analogy in 1 Corinthians 15 when he'll say it's like when someone gives birth. The new world, the new body is like when you give birth. It's related to it, but it's not the same. So God doesn't start from scratch. Somehow he uses the old and the new, like Jesus' body. Jesus' body could lie in the tomb, just laid in the tomb just fine. And he had a brand new body. I don't want that. It's an old nasty old thing. I got this one. No, the fact that the body's gone and now he has a new body is good Jewish theology. That is to say, he used the old somehow into a brand new resurrected body. That's exactly what Paul said of us. Jesus is the first fruits. He's what we will be like. However lovely Dennis is, one day he's going to look even lovelier. And we don't need an old Dennis body. No matter how long it's been before he comes back or we see again, he's going to use a little bit of that already. He didn't explain exactly. Tribulation, birth pains, trials, whatever. And if you'll notice carefully in apocalyptic literature, including Revelation, it tends to get worse and worse and worse, as I said this last week, right before we finished, in its scope. So it might start off by saying, it might say there was a plague. It might say then there's let's call it insect swarm or whatever. And then it progresses. Eventually it's going to get to an earthquake. It always got to get to earthquake, right? And then it's going to get to, that's the global, and you're going to have wars and rumors of wars. That's humans now getting involved. It's not always in this exact order. I'm just showing you, this is pretty common though. And then it's going to go, and eventually, once you get all this human and earth and animals all at war and chaos, right? The picture is just coming unraveled. Then it gets cosmic in scale. Then you see the moon turn to blood. And then you see the sun fall from the sky. And then you see, then it's all over. Mountains fall down, lakes are gone, things burn up. And it's the sense of scope increases. Why? Because it's getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So, are you with me so far? Because I'm going pretty fast, but pause if don't be scared to ask. This is the basic view of almost all Jewish and Christian apocalyptic authors. Authors who wrote books and letters like our Revelation. This is their worldview. And it seems to have been the case that the Apostle Paul shared the same view. Okay, having said that, this is where I think it's pretty cool. And this changed the way, I really did, I'm not being melodramatic, it changed the way I saw my Christian life when I learned all this, and it really hit me. Since this is true, because it is, and you go back and read New Testament, now it's going to pop from every page. You'll go, that's what's going on. That's why they talk about the end is near. That's why Paul says in Romans 12, the night is far gone, the day is here. Therefore live according as if in the day. It's like the sunrise. You act like the sun's already risen, because we're almost there. I can see it coming. I can see it. That's apocalyptic, baby. That's apocalyptic. Okay, so apocalyptic authors had another thing in common. Not only is it getting worse and worse and worse, but we're right in the middle of it. Okay, this is us, not the U.S., but okay, that too. That's what they would say. They would say, we're in here. They disagreed on how close we were to the very end, but they all agreed we're close to the very end. And the reason, now listen, so what they're doing is because of their view, and this is, when they hear about wars and rumors of war, when they hear about the earthquake that knocked out Vesuvius around AD 79 and knocked out the whole town of Pompeii. When you hear, you hear about the war. I heard about that too. Did you hear about that plague? I heard about that too. You're going to say, man, what's going on? And for them, they had an answer. The end has come. We're right in the middle of the birth pangs. It's the sign that the shift of the ages is just about to happen. And they go, well, so what do we do? And then apocalyptic author says, let me tell you this, I'll write a book. And I will tell you exactly what to do. And usually the message is this. If you're going the right path, good for you. Get ready because the end's coming. Just don't give up. If you're a Christian and you're not really on the right path, you better repent now. But you have hope because the end's not here. You're almost there. If you're just a straight up pagan, you better repent because you are sunk. Judgment day is coming. And they believe this so much so, and I remember asking a New Testament scholar, it's just sad he died, I think it was last year or the year before, British scholar, very well respected him, I. Howard Marshall. He came and spoke at my master's degree one time. And I asked him, he did this presentation on something else, and I asked him, what do you do? It's called the delay of the parousia, we call it technical. That parousia, Jesus' return, what do you do with the fact in the New Testament, it seems like he's coming back any second, but he's not here yet. And so I said, what do you do with the delay of parousia and their eschatological view, blah, blah, nerd talk. Anyway, he goes, that's a good point. I knew, and he said, this is the way I see it. And he was actually on the ground flat, but I'll stand up here because it's even better. He said, it's like the authors came all the way up to the edge. They believe that all of us come right to the edge. And to use this vocabulary, he didn't say it, the shift of the ages. And then they went, and they turned. So we are always right on the edge. We're just rocking right on the side of it. Any day now, boom. You can't see me on the Facebook right now, but I do this way. So I'm on the edge. So I do live constantly with the urgency and awareness that any second it could be the time, the shift of the ages. And I thought he nailed it. I thought the metaphor is the right way to understand what the New Testament authors believed about the world. They were not driven by the Enlightenment. They were not driven by the ideas that progress, we're getting better. All we need is education, and the world will be all better. Thank you, Oprah. That's the standard view of everybody. All we need is we're just progress, science, education, it's all getting better. Apocalyptic authors say nonsense. How much better off is the moral landscape of humanity because of progress in science and education? That's exactly what they would say. Heard about a war lately? Heard about pestilence and earthquakes and famines and whatever? Oh my? Yep, they're going to say, told you so. 2,000 years hadn't solved junk. You know what, black holes? Good for you. Nothing's changed with the human condition. That's exactly what they would say. And we're right in the middle of it. And John the Revelator thinks that too. And so what you're going to see tonight, as we talk about more in a second, he will give these, he'll have a vision, he has a vision, and he'll explain his vision, and he'll unpack it. The first trumpet, the second trumpet, third, fourth, and you'll see it's going to progress, and then he'll go all the way to the seventh. And what he's doing is he gets all the way to fifth, sixth, and then he wants to go seven, and then he turns. And then he starts over. It's like 7 seals. 1 seal, 2 seal, 3, 6 seals, and then it's like 4, 7 these. He don't want to cross over the border until all the way to end when he says, I saw new heavens and new earth, and then he takes a leap. He'll make you wait for it. And I'm going to say more about that in a second. But before I talk about his overview, I'm just trying to explain this to you. Any question or comments about this so far?
Is there a way to measure depression and suicidal tendencies?
It's their way to measure depression and suicidal tendencies. Yeah, it's funny. No, it's funny, sad. Yeah, I wonder if, like, apocalyptic authors would probably say it's the sign that how bad things have gotten. And that, of course, people putting their faith in the wrong things, that kind of stuff, probably. They would not have had a psychological response like serotonin. That would have made any sense to them.
Are these authors, would you say, inspired by God in their opinions and beliefs?
That's a
God
great
is
question.
the overall authority, so
Right.
unless it comes from God himself, we can't necessarily believe it.
That's a great question. So are these authors, and I'm just repeating it for
It's got to be directed from God in order to be truth, real truth.
right, so are these authors inspired by God? It has to be from God to be real truth. On the second point, my view is, I concur with C.S. Lewis, who believes that you can have little t truths in all kinds of world religions in all kinds of ways. Little t truths. Like, yeah, that's true. But in Christianity, we have the capital T truth. That is, it's the ultimate truth for which our worldview depends. So I find that quite compelling. So even if a person didn't get it all right, they got some nuggets here and there. Then the question is, well, did they get it all right or not? There is no scientific theory. There's no way to get around it. You either believe it or you don't. You either believe it or you don't. The church struggled for centuries for certain books to make it into what's called the canon, from kanon in Greek, which it means, well, in this context, it means something like a list. In this context, it means the rule, but something like a ruler. The Gospels made it pretty quickly. Paul's letters seem to make it really quickly, but some of these other ones, Jude, 1, 2 Peter, particularly 2 Peter, Hebrews, Jude, and in Revelation, had a harder time over time for the churches to use it as universal. And I'd be happy to talk about that sometime if you want. But the Apocalypse of John had one of the hardest times. And I said last week in the Eastern Orthodox Church, it went until about the 800s till they said, okay, it should be in the canon. They liked the Apocalypse of Peter better. So for a while it took it. Now, the question is, well, David, does that mean it's inspired? I think the early church would probably have said different books are inspired. And eventually, over a long period of time, they decided these books, either some they would say, some are not, these should be in it. Others would say it's probably more inspired. That's a long story of canon. There are books I can recommend on how the canon got formed. So, what about me? I consider the texts authoritative, at least, at minimum, their chief authority for my belief and practice in life. Why is that? For two reasons. One is because the church itself, from the 5th century on, handed this down to me. I have to trust that they're right. I have to trust it. It was a long, painstaking process of churches from Greek-speaking, Latin-speaking, Northeast, Southwest. There's no pope that ruled in and out. There's no secret books. All that nonsense makes for Hollywood is nonsense. It was a long process. The Spirit, I'm convinced, moved through the church. So I hold it as authoritative because I think the church knew what they were doing. The second reason I find it authoritative is because, in general, I find that the New Testament documents are corroborated historically. If the church handed it down and it wasn't historically corroborated, then I wouldn't care what the church said. And I'll give you a case in point. That's the Mormon Bible. The Mormon Bible, they said it's handed down for a long time, ever since their prophets. But there's massive holes in the historicity of the Mormon text. Therefore, I don't find that authoritative. I'm not a Mormon. So for me, I have to have both those components together. So if you believe it's inspired, it's a faith statement. It's just simply if you say, I believe it's inspired or not. I think and then if you say that, there's about 6 to 8 different understandings of the word inspired in Christian history of how to use it. My own personal view, which does not have to be any of your view, my view is that the authors were filled with the Spirit's leading to write something down. They felt compelled to write it, and they were convinced God had given them a message. And then I think God helped give that person a message because he knew that person would write a message that would work. But they used their mindset, their environment, their vocabulary, their way of getting at it to express the best way they knew how to communicate the truth. So I see it as this divine human element, like I see Jesus as divine and human. That's how I see the understanding of Scripture. It doesn't have to be your view. But no matter what the view is, to me, it's absolutely the sole authority. Yes, ma'am. Very good question. So according to my chart, we're in the tribulation now. Yes. And that we are in it and more is to come. And in my view, which we'll do in Revelation, I'll read the text and you decide for yourself. It just seems to me sometimes pretty commonsensical that these things happen within his lifetime. For example, the 7 seals. Once we get about the 5th and 6th seal, clearly it has not happened. Clearly because the moon is turned to blood, the sun, blah, 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 blah. And the 7th is the consummation. That's the world to come. That hasn't happened either. So it seems to me when John writes it, he puts their audience, and therefore I'd say us, always around the 4th and 5th, 5th and 6th seal or trumpet or angel or whatever, to show that, boy, we're close. We're not closest yet. So if 6 steps and 7th is world to come, we're not to 6 yet. We're around 4 and 5, but so we're close, not as close as we could be, and we're certainly not in the world to come. And in my reading, it makes the most sense of all of the examples. And so when we get into it, I'll show that. So I do think they think that. I do think very much they think we're in the tribulation. Yes, sir. Sir.
Well, is there a defining moment for when the tribulation began?
Great question. Is there a defining moment when the tribulation began? It depends on the apocalyptic author, but John the Revelator thinks that happened, and this is, when we get to it, we're going to talk about it. The New Testament authors disagree on when Satan was defeated in his power. They disagree. Some have the view that his power was defeated with Jesus' temptation narratives. Others say it was defeated on the cross, and some aren't very clear. John the Revelator's view is when he died on the cross, that's when the powers were broken. And so his view primarily, if not only, is that the major tribulation began with Jesus coming here and certainly his crucifixion. That's when things got real, real bad. And that's pretty standard view amongst Christian and Christian literature, because they would say because it's Jesus. He wasn't a dude. That's when things got started. It started the timer. And we'll talk, as we go to Revelation, we'll see more and more what I'm talking about. There's a particular chapter where he spends a big chunk of energy talking about when he saw Satan fall from heaven and whatever, but he relates that to the death of Jesus. Yes, sir. And he had a question here. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Right. So you're saying right. So you're saying that it seems like ever since Cain and Abel and Adam, it's all been bad for a long time. Apocalyptic authors would concur with you. That's why they would say it's a present evil age. That exact expression probably isn't found much in the literature, but and many scholars, and I'm convinced that's how they would describe it too. They would say that's right. It's evil. And they would quote from Genesis 7. They would quote from other places that say, from birth the heart is corrupt and we're so evil. They pick out those verses particularly that talk about how corrupt humans are, which Calvinists like to do too, but that's their favorite verses, and not really, but kind of. But it's been evil. But they would say, it's been evil, but this final end time tribulation, chaos breaking through, that's just started, and that depends sometime around the time of Jesus. Sometime around the time of Jesus. Yes, sir.
I'm just going to say
No, move on.
the simple interpretation here with ESV is because Christ's death had already won the decisive victory over evil. Revelation does not share the pessimism of Jewish apocalyptic literature regarding the present age. In other words, transient and sin-infected though it is. Rather, Revelation sees believers as conquerors, which the word conquerors here, we remain believers, right? I mean,
Right.
even now through endurance under suffering and fidelity to the testimony of Jesus, through which even their persecutors are called to salvation through repentance and faith.
Right. But I don't know who wrote that. What scholar who wrote that? He or she? Does it say the name of the?
You know, it does not.
Okay, maybe the front.
This is, well, there's probably 150.
Yeah, they probably have as well. I disagree with him or her because the human heart in Revelation, and I'll show this from the Millennium. I think Talbert and some others make a compelling view that the average human heart is that evil. It is corrupt. For Christians, they have what they would believe is the Spirit's involvement, and also, particularly in Revelation, an example in Jesus to stay faithful. And he'll use metaphors over and over like, and you've been sealed, or you have a new name, sometimes written on your forehead, or you have a new stone. That is, you've been claimed and somehow you're being spiritually protected from apostasy if you stay faithful. If you stay faithful. But that doesn't mean for a second they're still not evil. They need to be helped, enabled to make it, because why? They want to sin. That's good. Only because of time we'll move on. Is that okay? Good stuff. So I think we're in the tribulation, and there you go. There we go. World to come, present evil age, and bam. Okay, let me ask you a question. Let's see, I got a diamond. The different ways to look at a diamond. And let's imagine it's such a pretty one like this. It's multicolor, like just kind of like Revelation. If I got that diamond, or this eraser, whatever you might say, if only I had a fake one, and I looked at one side, and I turned the other side, and I described it from that side, and I turned it upside down, I described that side, and this side, and this side. And I did that 7 times. Of course, it's the exact same diamond. I'm describing it different ways from different perspectives. That's all I'm doing. That's it. Talbert argues that John the Revelator has used a very common Greco-Roman rhetorical technique called recapitulation. To recapitulate means you repeat it, you change a little variation. You don't say it word for word. Yeah, you tweak. So you'd repeat it, but it's a little different. You tell the story again, but you change the details. And you do it again, you change the details. That's exactly what he's saying in my analogy here of the diamond or whatever, which I think I might even got from Talbert in class, but it works. That there's 7 ways of saying the same thing. So if you look on your outline, this is an outline there on the other handout I gave you. What I've done is I put the headings on one screen because I want you to see the whole thing in one snapshot. At the very, very top of your handout, it just says Revelation outline. Is that what it says? It says the Apocalypse of John. Apocalypse of John, outlined by Charles Talbert. It's the other stack of papers. So this is not the features of apocalyptic literature, it's the other one. At the very, very top, it says Revelation 1 to 9 to 3:22 on the piece of paper. You should see that right at the top. So it says the Apocalypse of John, right here at the top. It's underlined. It's underlined. So what I'm trying to show you now is Talbert's way to break down the literary structure of the book. There are many different ways to do it. There are many ways to do it. Scholars give hundreds of ways. I think Talbert's is the most compelling I've ever read. I find it very compelling, and that's why I'm giving it to you. And so that's the major heading, which means if I looked in Revelation chapter 1, 9 to 3:22, that's the prophetic call and the 7 letters. And my hope is to get to the prophetic call and the 7 letters next week. And then we're going to go much faster. Okay, we're going to get to hit the ground running. The second major heading is Revelation 4:1 to 8:1. If you look on your handout, is that page 2 or 3? If you flip over, page 3 there in the little handout. So you'll see at the top it says 1 equals Revelation 4:1 to 8:1. You see that? And then, so what Talbert argues, stay with me here, is that John, the prophet, the author, had a vision of the shift of the ages. And he talks about that vision of the shift of the ages 7 different times. 7 different times to talk about the exact same vision of the shift of the ages. And Talbert breaks up like this. The first time he talks about it is Revelation 4:1 to 8:1. The second time he talks about it, so I walk all the way up, I get all the way to version 7, and I go, and I rewind it, and then I do a second time. Here's the second way to talk about my vision I had. My second time to do my dream. It's like this. It's like 7 trumpets. And this. Here's a third time. It tells again. And I'm going to come back and unpack that. Until the 7th time finally goes, okay, let me tell you what happened afterwards. And the vision after all the tribulation, and then he steps off. And then I saw new heavens and new earth. So in the literary structure of the whole book, Talbert's arguing we see the same shift of the ages 7 times. Technically speaking, kind of, sort of, it's really, I know, I'm going to sound like I'm 4 times. But here's why. Revelation 4:1 to 8:1. Look on the TV up here. Revelation 8:2 to 11:18. And then we have what I call a sermon. It's John's little sermonette. The source of tribulation is Satan via Roman power and domination. So he's explaining these 2 major scenes, the 7 trumpets and the 7 seals and the 7 trumpets. And then he has this long excursus from 11:19 to 13:18 to describe, as a sermon, it's a theological, here's what's going on behind the scenes. Then he goes back a 4th time and talks about more tribulation. This time it's to non-Christians, these next 2. This was to Christians. And he does it again in 5. And then he gives another sermon, another theological reflection. And this time he talks about the source is Satan via the economic power of Rome. The first time it's about their imperial power. The second time he talks about economic power. And the 7th time is the consummation. And I saw new heavens and earth. And then 22:6 through 15 or whatever, that's the epilogue. That's the, don't touch the words of these prophecy, but I didn't put it up here. Let me ask you this question. Do you see the headings in your outline? They're underlined? Okay, that's all. That's the major point. Everything beneath there is just from Revelation. All this is an attempt to break down the literary structure. That's all this is. That's helpful when we interpret the Bible, because sometimes we go, oh, we're kind of getting the mind of, if I read Susan's journal, I go, come to find out there are chapters. This is a book. Now I see it. There's 14 chapters, and she's moving, aha. It helps me understand more of the story and the flow. And that's what since none of the New Testament has chapter or number, none of them do, not in the manuscripts. It's all just flowing letters. All of it is. The chapter and verses are not inspired and sacred. And on top of that, nor the subject headings, and nor the outlines. These are scholarly attempts when they studied a whole lifetime to go, I think if John were here, and we said, John, brother, put an outline for and show me what your big picture is. Scholars say, I think this is what he would say. And Talbert says, I think this is what John the Revelator would say. I think John the Revelator would show up on this stage and say, I'm trying to talk about the shift of the ages, this vision. You ought to have been there. And I don't want to say it one time. I don't go, then it happened this, and I'm done, period. No. I want to get at it over and over and over in different ways. Well, John, why do you do that? Why not just say it wants to be done? Because I'm using recapitulation. It's what the great authors do. They repeat it in variation. It's the way to make it exciting. Well, why not just say it literally? Why not just tell me the facts? Let me ask you this question. You ever been in love before? Yeah. What's it feel like? Well, it's like butterflies in my stomach. Wait. Why are you going to do all that metaphor nonsense? Just tell me what it means to be in love. You're going to say, but John, I don't know how to do that. You can't when you're talking about love. John's going to say exactly. You can't talk science when you talk this stuff. It's a vision of the end times. I've got to use symbols and metaphors. I'm trying my best to articulate in many different ways to explain to you what's going on. And we are in the slap dab, he would say, in the middle of tribulation. And Christians are in the midst of it. I'm going to give you 2 different ways to get at it. And then I'm going to tell you a little sermon to unpack why they're getting tribulated. Tribulated? Did I make a word? And then I'm going to tell you some more tribulation. This time, how it's really happening to non-Christians. And I'm going to tell you why that happens too. And then when you think you couldn't have any more, when you're all sad and depressed, I'm consummation. Now, he breaks it down further than that because I gave you a long outline. And we'll go through that together. But that's the big picture. And I'm intuitive. I like big picture guys. So that's my second or third time to try to get at it, just like he's got 7 times. I'm not going to do it 7 times, but I'm going to stop there. Are there any questions or comments about that? Please don't be afraid to ask.
Is there a specific reason why most of these Revelation-type documents got written down and a lot of the other oral prophets were just passed along orally? They didn't take the time to write it down at the time. Whereas these seem to be written, okay, I had a vision, he came to me, this happened, this is a current event at this time.
Very good question. Why do apocalyptic authors tend to write their stuff down? It's a very good question because it seems to fit the genre of the literature that is, it's supposed to be written down and then given out. And some of that seems to have been gotten from Daniel. This is real striking because in Daniel, I think it's Daniel 7, but it's in Daniel's gospel, and Daniel's, the Jews call Daniel, of course, are writing. In Daniel, he says, he's given this message, and he says, write it down in a book, but do not open it. It's for the future.
It's sealed.
It's sealed shut, don't open it. The point is, it's supposed to be for people who either tons of time later or it's wink, wink later. Well, we're the later, whenever who wrote it. And we open up and go, now it's written, now it applies to me. But Daniel's told, don't open it up. That's not at all. And John says, at the end of the book 21, he says, do not seal it. Time is now. Time's up. You don't have time to seal this junk up. You got to tell everybody you know. And writing it down that moment seems to have been part of that apocalyptic genre. It's got to be written. That's a great question. We're not exactly sure why they did it, besides it seems to have been primarily a written way to do it versus the oral. Turn to Revelation chapter 4. I'm going to look at these real quickly. We're going to go real quickly to show what I'm talking about. Revelation chapter 4. I'm looking at the headings real quickly, so I'm going to skip a lot of chapter and verses real quickly. Revelation chapter 4, 1. He says, after this I looked, and behold, in heaven an open door. And the first voice which I'd heard speaking to me said like a trumpet, said, come up hither, and I will show you what must take place after this. And he's in the Spirit. Now look at my chart. We're going to go to chapter 8:1. Talbert says that from that verse all the way to 8:1 is one big unit. Because it's the 7 seals. And if you look in chapter 8:1, it shouldn't be called 8:1. This should have been the end of chapter 7. But it's unfortunate. When the Lamb opened the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. That's pretty anticlimactic, because it is. Because he doesn't want you to know what happens with the 7th seal. He wants you to wait to the very bitter end before he tells you what happens when the 7th one's open. Then in verse 2 he says, then I saw the 7 angels, and they had 7 trumpets. And he rewinds it. And in 8:2, he tells a whole other series of tribulations. And he has 7 trumpets. The first trumpet blows, the second trumpet blows, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and then the 7th. What happens in 11:18? Let's see what happens in the 7th trumpet. I can't wait. In 11:18, then nothing happens. The nations raged, but the wrath came, the time for the dead to be judged, for warding their servants, the prophets and saints, those who fear your name, both small and great, and for destroying the destroyers of the earth. So it's time for judgment. And then it says in verse 19, then God's temple in heaven was open. There's an ark of the covenant seen within this temple, blah, blah. There's no judgment. Like, do something. We don't have the judgment scene. There's no restoration. There's nothing, because he don't want you to get it yet. He doesn't want you. That's what Talbert would say. Talbert would say he wants you to wait for it. And so then he has this, I call like a little sermon. Then he comes back again in 14:1 through 20 and 15 and so forth. Okay. I want to move on. Anything else? You don't have to memorize all this if this freaks you out or makes you very anxious. Okay? Talking to you. You don't have to memorize all of it. I give you the outlines. I give you hands out. The outlines right in front of you. I don't have all this, well, a lot of it memorized, but I don't have all of it memorized because I go to the outline. I don't have all of the apocalypse and all of its meanings. That's why I have commentaries. I myself have to go straight back to the commentaries and go, what's all that red horse, what's that all about? Oh, yeah, that's right. I mean, you just memorize all of it. That's fine. You'll have the outline right in front of your face. And so when we go over this together, you can walk with the outline there right in front of you. Let's look very briefly at John the Revelator. Let's go to Revelation chapter 1. Revelation chapter 1. This is also in your handout. It's at the very top of your handout. of that same outline. I just have it on the screen as well. You have this in print right in front of you. I try to put as much as I can in print so you're not frantically writing, from screen to screen. The author is John the prophet. John never says he's an apostle. He never says he's one of the disciples. He calls himself the prophet. Look in verse 3. Again, we're looking at Bible really quickly, so get your Bible app, your Bible. Verse 3, 1-3. Blessed is he who reads aloud the words of the what? Of the prophecy. Go down to verse 10. Go down to verse 10. I was in the Spirit of the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet. I was in the Spirit. That's code for prophetic. Verse 11, write what you see in my book, and blah, blah, blah. Go to the very end of the whole book, chapter 22:9. 22:9. John the Revelator says, you must not do that. I'm a fellow servant with you and your what? Brethren, the prophets. And with those who keep the words of this book, worship God, dummy, not angels. And then 18 and 19 says a very similar thing. The prophecy, you can't touch the words of this prophecy. He's the true prophet versus the false ones in 2:20. When he talks about the 12 apostles, he's not one of them. This is not John the Apostle. People, it blows their mind. John, Yoni, was a very common name in the ancient world. So this is not John the Apostle. It might have been John the Elder, who was also the prophet. John the Elder of 1, 2, 3, the letters of 1, 2, 3 John. It might be the same guy for a lot of reasons, but for time, I'm not going to go into all that. But he's John the prophet, so I'll call him John the Revelator, John the prophet. He thinks he's a prophet. Just a reminder, because I said this last week, or it's new for you if this is your first week here, prophetis means mouthpiece, oracle, spokesperson, that's it. Prophetis does not mean future teller. That's all it means is mouthpiece. Hayden, please go tell Julia it's time for dinner. Julia, it's time for dinner. He's a prophet. That's it. If I said, Hayden, go tell Julia it's time for dinner in 5 minutes. Julia, it's time for dinner in 5 minutes. He's a prophet. Go tell Julia it's time for dinner in 50 years. Julia, it's time for dinner in 50 years. He's still a prophet. But that time limit of a distant future is maybe like 1% of all the Old Testament prophecy. The problem is in American English, prophet means future teller, prognosticator. That's well and good, fine, but that's not what the Bible means, so don't misread the Bible with that. So he thinks he's writing a book that should not be sealed up because it happens right now. The times of the essence, they're in the tribulation. You're in steps 4 or 5-ish, and 7's almost here. We don't have time to play. So this is not, he probably does not perceive of this as the distant future. How much distant? We don't know, but he probably doesn't think it's a long, long time from now. He's in Patmos. He says that, right? Look in Revelation 1:1. You see that there? And he's on the island of Patmos. He's on verse 9. Look in verse 9. I, John, your brother, who share with you in Jesus the tribulation and the kingdom and the patient endurance, who was on the island called Patmos on account of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. That's a penal colony. It's like an ancient Australia. It's where the British set all their prisoners. You know that about Australia, right? It's kind of weird, huh? Kind of cool that they're all... Anyway, Tertullian, who's a very, very well-known Latin author, he's the first guy to introduce the term what in my growth group? He introduced the term, first time in history, well, to use it the way he did. A Latin author, he introduced the term in my growth group. We're talking about one topic in my growth group. The Trinity. Thank you very much. Whew. Very good. I'm about to say, man, my growth group is just, I want to start from scratch. Okay, guys, when the Revelation study's listening. So Trinitas, Tertullian's a well-known Latin author. He says, in his book called Prescription Theory, that's his letter, that this is regulatio in insulum, and that's a particular punishment where he's in trouble where he loses his official rights of property. He doesn't lose that. He's just exiled. Remember, they don't have long-term prisons in the ancient world. They had jails like Mayberry. You get drunk, you come in, you lock yourself in, you go the next day. And that's kind of, they might stay there for a few weeks and so forth, but if it's an extended period of time and they've not been beaten, beheaded, crucified, or let go or exiled, they go under house arrest, which is what the Apostle Paul is in the end of Acts. About 2 years under house arrest.
Political asylum.
Political asylum, yeah.
It's kind of like they didn't want him to, they didn't want him to be a martyr, so the best way to do that, don't take his rights, just isolate him.
Oh, here, didn't want to be a martyr. Maybe, we don't know what their motivation was. We don't know, but maybe didn't want to be a martyr. That might be true. But we don't know. That's what Tertullian says. But Tertullian writes this, 150 years after the fact, maybe 100 years. He might be wrong, but if he's right, That's what happened. So for whatever reason, he got in trouble for probably being a Christian, probably being a prophet, probably being a leader in the community, which also makes sense if he is John the Elder of 1, 2, 3 John. And he's exiled. He gets in trouble for being a Christian for whatever reason, and his punishment is he's grounded. He's kicked out of his home. He has to go live in a penal colony. And while he's there, on the Lord's Day, probably Sunday, he gets a vision, and he writes a document. Who do you write this document to? Churches mentioned at first. Christians who were to hear the letters in its entirety. They would have shown up, and someone would have stood there and read this joker. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, turn to Mark chapter 13. Mark 13. In the ancient world, Christians loved books, and Jews did too, but they really, overall, were an oral society. Oral. They heard things. Look in verse 14. 13, 14. Mark 13, 14. 13, 14. But when you see the desolating sacrilege set up where it ought not to be, let the reader understand. You have that parentheses there? Parentheses? Then let those who are Judea flee to the mountains. In Greek, there are no parentheses. It's the editors of your translation that put that. That's Mark talking to the reader of the gospel to the church. Let the reader understand. Understand what? We're not real sure. It probably means understand that when you see the desolating sacrilege is basically a direct quote from Daniel. And in Daniel's time, the desolating sacrilege, unless it's genuine prophecy, even if it is, its references eventually when Antiochus Epiphanes IV comes into town and he sacrifices a pig on the altar in the temple. They don't like that. It causes a rebellion. Eventually, Judas Maccabeus means the hammer. Judas Maccabeus and his kinfolk slaughter the local priest on the altar eventually, and then they start a rebellion called the Maccabean Revolt. They call that killing a pig on the altar the desolating sacrilege. Desolates it, it destroys it, it makes it completely impure. Well, when Jesus says in Mark 13 that, let the reader understand, he's probably saying, unpack that for the people if they don't get it. This is a reference from Daniel. But guess what? Something like that happened in AD 70 when the temple fell. So it's probably saying, wink, wink, explain to them if they don't get it. But all the point is, in the Gospels and in Revelation, at the very end of Revelation chapter 21, it says, and to the reader of this, the one who hears it's blessed. The blessed is the one who, and my fellow prophets, and the one who hears this book. So this was read aloud to all the churches. And I want so badly one day, maybe we're not there yet as a church, I would so love to start having New Testament reading times from top to bottom. Read Mark in one setting, Revelation in one setting. That's exactly how the ancient people heard it forever until basically modern times. And that would be so cool. And I'll talk about the churches in a second. When was this thing written? We don't know. We don't know. It was probably written, some churches probably didn't exist by a certain author's time, so we know it's not that early. There were two Roman emperors in particular who gave Christians a hard time. Not the worst, but a hard time. And one was Nero, one was Domitian. And they both lived toward the end of the first century. Nero lived in the early 70s. Domitian lived around the year 90 to 100. And Trajan lived a little bit after that. Trajan lived right after the first century, so 110-ish, 1 to 15-ish. The fact is, we don't know exactly. And if you want more details, read the commentaries. But when you read the commentary, the book of Revelation, what's clear is they're not under heavy persecution. They're not. So if you go to later emperors, they had official pogroms, go find the Christians. That's not the case in Revelation. So it's probably not later emperors. It can't be too early, it can't be that late. There's references in Revelation to this Nero myth. One myth is that Nero, he died, but they think, well, he didn't really die. He pretended he died. He went off to the Parthians. He's going to come back and kill the Romans. Well, that was a myth alive. So it probably means by that time, at least Nero's been dead. So it's or close to it. So it's probably by the end of the first century. Bottom line, we don't know exactly when. If it's okay with you, I'm just keep going, because unless you want to read more details, you can read all the commentaries you want. But that's it. I personally think it happened around the time of Domitian. I think it's right after Nero, another time of Domitian, for several reasons. And you know the number 666, though it should be 616. I'll tell you why later. It's referencing myths about Nero. So I think personally it was right around the time. And then we're talking about a couple, 10 to 20 years max of a window. We're not talking about that drastic of a time. Any questions about that? John the prophet writing Patmos. There we go. Okay, what in the world is Patmos? Where is he at? Okay, here we are at the big picture. So here's Israel, here's Jerusalem over here. See the map here? Can you see that? Of course, there's Cyprus or whatever. Here's Patmos, the baby island where he's exiled. And here are his churches. Here are the churches. Now so we see, well, Ephesus, you can go there today. This is now modern day Turkey. In Roman times, this was called Asia or Asia Minoris, small Asia. And that's why on these old maps it'll say Asia, right? You see that right there? If you can read that far away. The Apostle Paul, of course, did missionary journeys all over here to Philippi, Berea, here's Corinth, all over. He would sail to here, and so forth. And I won't get bogged down. Okay, so anyway, these major churches are here in the region of Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. All Greek-speaking. Greek, all day long. If I were to zoom in that same area, I'll show you this map right here. So we go from Ephesus, number 1. There's a little path that goes to number 2 to Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And because it is a path and a route that you could go, it's common belief in scholarship that John the prophet, who of course he is a prophet, sorry, I guess my little recommendation here, come on back to my origami. He is a prophet, but there are 2 kinds of prophets in the ancient world in Christianity. Go back to my little bird. So one kind of prophet is the kind that shows up in a local church. And you might understand this too. Well, you need to hear this. In first century, couple centuries of the church, the number 1 most authoritative person in the church is the apostle. Most authoritative person. That's why Paul debates it all the time. Am I not an apostle? Like, don't listen to those guys, they're lying. I am an apostle. That's someone who knows the teaching of Jesus. They've experienced the resurrected Jesus. They've been sent by him to do his work. Number 1 chief authority. They're the big dogs. The second most authoritative person in the church is a prophet or prophetess. Because of the belief that the Spirit overtook the person and they had a word from the Lord right then and there to share to the congregation. Remember, not a future, but thus says the Lord. So Dennis just pops up. I'll just pick him because you're close. Dennis walks in and says, he's got the gift of prophecy, which is deliberately, that's in 1 Corinthians 12 and Romans 12, these gifts of the Spirit. And one is the gift of prophecy. And they would say, well, Dennis has it. Why? Because he said, well, he says I had it, but also if he's done prophetic utterances of the past and it's true, we believe him. He has the gift of the Spirit of prophecy. So he walks in one day and goes, I got a word from the Lord. We get quiet and listen. And then in walks Matthew, who has the gift of music. And like in Ephesians it says, sing songs and spiritual songs and praise songs. He means spiritual song, not mean of the Spirit. He means in the Spirit. That is, Matthew goes, I got a song. Let's sing it. It goes like this. Holy, holy, holy. You sing it. That's in the Spirit. He feels inspired by God to make up a song to worship him on the spot. One kind of prophet, I'm just giving you examples of spiritual gifts. One kind of prophet sticks here at First Christian. This is my home, this is my crib. That's all. And that we have evidence in the New Testament and early church. Boom. The second kind of prophet is one that goes in different churches. They're a visiting prophet. They show up at different churches and says, I got a word from the Lord. And I go over there to First Baptist. I got a word from the Lord. And I go to First Presbyterian. I got a word from the Lord. And most scholars would argue that that's exactly what John the prophet is. He's a circuit rider. And these are his churches. And so this is the path. He knows these churches. Here's Patmos. See a little dot here? Scribe calls. Boom. And these are his major churches. And so as he writes to these 7 churches of Asia Minor, which you're going to talk about, he knows these people. He's not a stranger, he's not a foreigner who goes, I just feel to write to the church of Pergamum. No, he knows that church. He knows the people there. He knows the struggles they're going through. And the Spirit, he believes, has given him a word to that particular context. So the 7 churches of Revelation. Well, David, it's 7 churches. Is it conceivable, as we talked about last time, that 7 is representative of something else? Because it's 7? The answer is, of course it is, right? It's the perfect number. It's complete. So the odds are pretty high that the 7 got it, but other churches read it too. But he didn't want to do 8 churches. That's not apocalyptic. You got to have 7. Just like Revelation, there are 7 different beatitudes spread throughout. There are 7 times for this, and 7, it's just the perfect number. Well, David, that means when he writes to the 7 churches, and this apocalyptic word is not sealed up, but written down and passed around in a heartbeat, if that's the email that goes around, that means everybody reads everyone else's business. Yes, that's exactly what it means. It means when I got to Sardis, the sardines could read the news, bad and good, of what the Spirit said to Ephesus. Everybody knew their business because it was a word to the 7 churches, and it passed around. And when they got passed around, eventually, probably very quickly, if not immediately, they made copies. And probably what happened was Ephesus made a copy of the entire apocalypse and then passed it on. That's probably what happened. We don't have evidence in it, but I'm pretty convinced that's what happened. So John is a prophet, most certainly not a local one, but one that travels around to his churches. And you know, it's still true in the U.S. It was true for a long time. In Methodist churches, there weren't enough pastors to go around all the churches. And that's the number one reason why John Wesley started ordaining women. There just weren't enough men. And then what happened, of course, they would have circuits. They would have different churches they pastored on the same weekend, or they would rotate all the country churches. They still do it. In Catholic, it happens, the priests, their diocese is going to have multiple Catholic churches, and there's one priest assigned to all of them. That's real world 2017, it still happens. Well, that's what we're saying for the prophet. He had all his churches. Doesn't mean he's the main leader, it just means he's one of the main leaders. So when they got this letter, they'd have ripped that mail open, and we had a vision from John. We heard he was arrested. Where did they kill him? No, they just sent him off to Patmos. Went to Patmos, my uncle went there too. We got a word from him. We got a letter. Read it. Who can read it? Kathy, come here. You can read. Come on, read it. And boom, they would start reading. And they would have spread it to the next church, the next church, next church. These are the 7 churches. You can go there today to most of them, at least the ruins of them. Can I go ahead? Any questions or comments? Almost done. I don't know who came first, sorry. Dennis or the egg? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's just one of those, the way you stated this, presented this, is a better way to say it.
Okay.
How does this relate to Paul's first and second journeys and going out and preaching to all of these different areas and starting the movement, so to speak?
Good. How does it relate to Paul's missionary, we call them missionary journeys, though he doesn't, but basically, they don't relate that much. Some of these churches, we know he was involved, but all of them, we don't know. We don't know that he was involved with all of it, as far as I remember. I don't think we have evidence he was involved in all of these. But no doubt about it that Pauline Christianity was influential in the region. No doubt about it, because of the missionary effort done. No doubt about it because his missionary efforts were decades and decades before this document's written. So now we have kids and grandkids of the original Christians he baptized. So we have a time limit there. And secondly, we know for a fact it's because certain of these churches he started, and if he didn't start, he helped start. They're in Asia Minor. Yeah. But as far as that goes.
Because, you're right, there'd be a good 40, 50 years.
Yeah, almost certainly.
Timeline, you know.
Paul probably died between 1862 to 64. And so if this is, say, it's written at no earlier, 75 to 100, let's give it, so it's at least 15, 20 years, maybe up to 40 or 50. Mm-hmm. So I'd easily say second generation. First, they're still alive probably. Some of them are. Some that we know have died off, like the Thessaloniki, the people, it's not even on the map, didn't make it. It's over in Macedonia. When those people die, remember he writes in 1 Corinthians 5 says, don't want you to be ignorant about those who have fallen asleep and grieve like those who have no hope, because they've had loved ones who have already died. So, good, Tom? Good question. So in the ancient world, they didn't have church buildings. That's correct. So how did they get together? How did they meet together? The earliest known record of a building for a church probably didn't come to the mid-3rd century. Eurodopus, there's a particular church building that's really well known because it's the first one. And it's pretty small, and it has some Christian epigraphics, some inscriptions and whatnot on it. So for about 250 years probably, and maybe up to about 300, the dominant way Christians met were in homes, and typically of wealthy homeowners because they couldn't house that many. I've been, praise God, I've been able to go to this exact area. I've been to Ephesus and so forth, and I've seen an old Roman house, and it's, of course, concrete basically, but I mean stone and carved out. You go in the basement, and most scholars say there's a church used to meet here. And it is an old basement, and like you'd imagine, if you carved a cave and it had straight walls, I mean, that's what, they probably had some seats and stuff. But they also find some small baptistry-looking things. But for a couple hundred years easily, they just met people's homes. And so the biggest churches, like in Rome itself, when Paul writes a letter to the Romans, and this is a debate amongst scholars because of Romans 16, but there were probably multiple house churches, between probably 4 to 6 or 7 different house churches in Rome who were supposed to get that letter and then pass it around. We know that because he references at least 4 or 5 different leaders of house churches. And so that's probably makes the most sense of what happened. They probably had some wealthy people. When Paul went to Philippi, Or from the south, you say Philippi. But we went to Philippi here in Macedonia. He met Lydia, and Lydia was wealthy. She sold purple. She either wealthy independently or probably had a wealthy husband, had a business. He died. But they meet with her at her house. That was probably quite strategic on Paul's part to try to help convert wealthy people because they had they had more place to house people. So a big church, to answer your question, a large church. Now they had mega churches like in Jerusalem and maybe Rome if you put them all together. But Jerusalem had a real big one. But they lived kind of outskirts, so would meet together maybe in the temple grounds. But the average church all through Asia Minor and stuff, those things, they might have had, 25 people, 30 people. This is almost certainly the size of certain churches for a long time, right here in this room. Right here in this room. This would be a standard church. They would have a prophet, if they can, a musician, if they can, try to form some elders, if they can, or deacons, if they can. That kind of stuff. And if they can find someone who's teacher, and yeah. And then the house churches, how do they know? Do they spread the word? They call them. Probably to some degree, yes. They probably did say, we got a letter, it's time to meet. But it seems to have been the case that Christians, we don't have a lot of evidence, that they did in fact start meeting on a Sunday morning, what he will call the Lord's Day. There's not tons of evidence, but there is some. When Paul says the first day, when you gather in 1 Corinthians, when you gather on the first day of the week, take some money aside and so forth. I preached on it a couple months ago. But that first day of the week, most scholars think means Sunday. Because in the Roman timetable, that is the first day of the week. Not Monday, it's Sunday. Because they went to work on Sunday. It was Sunday, they worked in 7-day schedules, or they took off, and Jews took off Shabbat Saturday, but then Sunday was the first day of the week. So they probably met on a routine basis. They probably met on a routine basis on Sunday, which is their first work day. Either met early in the morning, as some ancient documents say. They would meet. Pliny the Younger says this. They met early in the morning. And the guy I just mentioned, Pliny the Younger, he lives in Bithynia. That's the same area. He writes documents, I referenced last week. He writes documents to his Emperor Trajan. There's the uncle Trajan. He writes documents around 111. That's the same time as Trajan Domitian. So around the same time that this book is written, probably, we have pagan sources of writing what the Christians are doing. And they say early in the morning before the sunrise or whatever, they meet together. We have other evidence from the Corinthian correspondence, about 60 years before the Trajan letters, go back. And Paul's letter to Corinth, it seems to have been the case they met after work. In 1 Corinthians, one of the chief problems is that they're not having communion together, not being unified. There's division in communion time because people who are wealthy don't work during the day. They're retired early because they're slaves to the work and they have land. So as they're at home and they have their little local church group, they're eating the bread and drinking the wine. And the day laborers get off and there's no food left. And it's a constant sign at communion of who the haves and have-nots. So we have evidence in different literature that some churches apparently met in the morning, some at night, maybe both. And so there's some routine of when they meet, of what day and when, and almost certainly they spread word to say, we got a letter and let's meet together. That's probably the best we got. Yes, ma'am. So if they make copies of it, how do we know the original? How do we know looking at the original? That's such a great question. If you'd only come to my study in this exact room called Why I Know Christianity is True in 4 parts, and that's online on the church's website. The audio and the handouts are all on the church's website. And I will explain. I think it's session 3. And I unpack exactly why I think it is trustworthy. We do not have the originals. The short answer is we have strong reason to believe that the manuscript tradition we have goes back at least to the 2nd century. So you would have to argue that by the end of the 1st century, when the New Testament's completed, and then within 50 to 100 years, you would have to believe there's massive rewriting and massive distortion in the lifetime of the early church fathers who also quote from it and who also are the disciples of the apostles. And that's hard for me to ever swallow. Another thing is Tertullian, the guy I mentioned earlier. Tertullian says that you can go to the churches to find the documents themselves. One papyrus scholar recently wrote a great book on this, and he suggested, based on his study, that if papyrus was taken care of, it could last about 200 years if it's taken good care of. And then when you add that, what Tertullian says, that some of the documents Paul wrote are in the churches. And it's funny, he says it in passing because he's arguing with a guy who doesn't trust it. He goes, go look for yourself. maybe Tertullian's wrong. I don't think he's lying, because that'd be he'd call your bluff on that. Like, why would you go say that if he's lying? Or maybe he's mistaken, or he's telling the truth, that you really could go to Corinth and find Paul's letter to the Corinthians, or the very first copy that now is basically kind of enshrined in that church community. They take it home, they keep it, take it home, and so forth. So, but now I was teasing about it if you hadn't been here. But really, if you want online, I'd be happy to send you a direct link. It's on the church website, resources, pastor study. Scroll down, it says, Why I Know Christianity is True. I think it's in four or five parts. Handouts, or you can click on the handout, see exactly what I'm talking about, and listen to it. And I also have a PowerPoint that if you want, I can send that to you as well. That's not, I wasn't streaming back then. But so I have reason to believe it. As trained in historian, I have reason to believe it, if that makes sense. But we cannot be certain because we don't have the originals. If you need to be certain, I can't give it to you. And that's anybody. We don't have the originals. I think it's very, very, very likely that it's very, very accurate.
Well, there's also some other,
Well,
the remnants of what was there.
right. And that's all when you say, well, it still matches what was then. We don't have what is then. That's the originals.
Right, originals are gone.
So we have reason to think it best represents. That's right. Bruce Metzger, the leading New Testament textual critic of the last century, taught at Princeton forever. I mean, he's very well respected. He said that he's confident that 99.98 to 99.99% of the original words, whatever, we still have them.
Are there, yeah. That's what I was trying to say.
So there's the 0.01 to whatever, or we call variants that we're not sure. And I talk about all my talk. I tell you exactly the ones to look at. And there's no mysteries, there's no shockers. And maybe it might be news to you if you've never looked into it. But in scholarship, we go, oh yeah, that's only a few handful of stories. Bart Ehrman will come out and say, can't trust it, it's all. I don't find that compelling. I've read his books in PhD, I don't find it compelling. You might, but I don't find it compelling. I'll move on real quickly, but I think there's one other hand. Yes, sir. I've never heard that in my life. I'm not sure. To give you a heads up, just real briefly, when we look at a translation today, so your Bible, what translation is that, brother? What translation? No, what's the translation? That's the name of the Bible. What's the Living, New Living or something? What is it? Okay, so the New King James Version. So that translation in English, and all modern translations come straight from the Greek, if it's in the New Testament, straight from the Hebrew in the Old Testament. So when people like me go to school, this right here is a Greek and English Bible. So I read from both. So this is Greek on one side and English on the other. So I'm one language removed from the original when I use English, or I just translate straight from the Greek. Now, it comes to my mind as English, right? Because I'm still one language removed, but that's why we study the original languages. That is one language removed from Jesus and the apostles because they spoke Aramaic, not Greek. But Paul used Greek. He spoke in Aramaic, but he wrote his letters in Greek. So anything in Paul or in Revelation, that was written in Greek. So I'm reading it exactly as he wrote it in the original language. So a lot of people, one of the common, you didn't say this, but a very common myth or legend amongst skeptics is it's been translated dozens of times and we can't trust it. Absolute nonsense. I talk about this in my talk. That's nonsense. Every modern translation, including that one, every modern translation has a person or a team of scholars who go straight back to the Greek or the Hebrew. It is one thing removed. It is true that some words are difficult to translate, but that's not a big deal. I guess just trust me. There's nothing that any translator goes, I don't have a clue, except for some minor things. Like in Psalms, it says Selah. Well, we don't know what Selah means. I have no clue what that means. I mean, there's some words we just don't know what they mean. But that's like 0.00001%, and that's no big deal. But that's a good question. Well,
The other question I have.
yeah.
We know that these letters were copied and shared in this 7-church circuit.
Correct.
How did they make it across to like Philippi and
Oh, good question. Yeah, so how do they make it across the sea or whatever? We don't know for sure, but based on a lot of evidence, if you just trust me, there's reason to believe that the early church, people in the early church simply carried it. They would make copies and then send copies to the different churches. For example, when Paul writes to Timothy and he says, bring my cloak from Troas and don't forget my parchments. Well, we hope he did. Hope he didn't forget it. Hope he brought them. That seems to have been a very common thing for people to do that. And the ancient world, there's no mailing system. If you're Rome, you have a mail system. You have your UPS. Everyone else doesn't. And the only way to get your document from here to there is either take it yourself, find someone you trust, my relative. Are you going to Rome? Next month. Okay, will you take my letter? The third thing you do is you can hire someone, but there's no guarantee they're going to take it. There's no guarantee they're going to make it. And there's no guarantee they're not going to tamper with it. So what you try to do is you seal it up with a wax. Even then, there's no guarantee they're going to make it. There just wasn't. So the best thing to do is find a friend or relative. And what we can tell from the evidence is the early Christians were brothers and sisters, and they wanted to spread the word, and so they did everywhere. And so all these churches on land, and usually by sea, they didn't usually do this straight shot. Usually went boom, 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 boom. They were scared to death of going wide open. They stayed close to the shore. They spread the word like wildfire. And wildfire it was, by the way. Translations of the New Testament manuscripts were translated immediately into Coptic down in Egypt, to Syriac. I mean, they just translated within 50 years. They had multiple translations. That stuff was traveling fast. The earliest known manuscript we have right now, I'm sorry, I get excited, get worked up, and then we've already had some early ones, is Papyrus 52. And P52 is a scrap out of credit card, and it comes from northern Egypt. And any manuscript textual critic will tell you that it probably comes from around 110 to 125 AD. Let that sink in. It means by 110-ish, the Gospel of John had already made it to Egypt, and this is at least a copy of it. The Gospel of John was probably written in Ephesus or maybe all over here. My point is, it had made it that far in just a couple of decades. Oh, Lord Jesus, we thank you so much. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for life today. Thank you for this text. Thank you. Thank you for the reminder that we're in the midst of the transition of ages, and we need the reminder in a world that demands our attention, when the grinds of life and routines, when our political affairs of this country make us think that we're supposed to be grounded and grabbing hard to this life. Please remind us in this study that it's not our home. At the same time, realize we're not being escapist. We have a lot of work to do while we're here. But in the book of Revelation, help us be reminded that in the midst of this tribulation, the shift of the ages is occurring all around us. So please give us the lenses through which to see that world breaking in all around us. Please help us do that. Please help us not see the mundane of life without your lenses. Help us not replace our value system from this world to that. And Lord Jesus, may we, as it comes in Revelation chapter 4, when we get a glimpse of you on the throne, be reminded that you are on your throne, and that when our life can scare us to death, when news hits us we did not expect, and we have a natural emotional response, please remind us tonight, for those who need to hear it, you're on your throne. No matter how shaky the world gets, no matter how shaky our own world gets, you're on your throne. Help us trust you. Help us show you the love and the praise that you deserve every day and every conversation. In the name of the resurrected Jesus, we all pray. Amen. Amen. God bless you.